Well, hello again, everybody. Brandon here, coming to you, hanging out today in my gallery slash studio here. And so it is technically January the 2nd today, making this video, my first video of the new year 2020. So I've decided that I'm going to do a couple different things this year. I'm going to keep turning out videos of some of the projects I'm working on, some walkthroughs and tutorials and time-lapse, all that stuff. But I'm also going to do a couple of different series of basically just quick tutorial videos of some of my landscape stuff that I do. So this particular series that I'm going to be starting with this video is going to be on some of the trees that I do. A couple of different videos on doing trees of different styles with different levels of detail and you know, using different brushes depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So like in this painting here behind me, this is a painting I did of Jones Gap State Park. And, you know, I've got obviously some background trees going here in the distance, and there's some foreground trees going on there. So there's a couple different things going there, some styles of trees that I do. And then if you look at another painting that I've got, if you take a look at that painting there on the wall, there are some background trees there behind that deer. So that's a slightly different technique there, creating those background trees. Another painting you may have seen my video on here recently, again there's some more background trees there. Those are distant trees with not a lot of detail going on. So this video series here is going to be of doing trees in different styles depending on how much time you want to take to do these trees. You know, if you're trying to turn out projects quickly or in a hurry, or if you want to take more time doing more detail. So level of detail, amount of time spent, dictating how you want to paint these trees and the techniques you want to use and the brushes that you want to use. That's what this series is going to be all about. The first video here, which will be part one in this series, I'm going to be doing a real basic tree like this, a 2-inch brush, large, quickly done. I mean, you're talking about a minute or two to get this tree done. And then also a little bit more extra detail in doing maybe some background trees or a distant tree line where I'm using a slightly smaller brush, but like a 1-inch to this, where I'm adding in just a little extra detail. So we're going to take a look at that video now. First thing you need to determine when you're going to be painting some trees is really how much detail are you trying to put in these trees, how much time are you trying to spend on painting these trees, and then maybe that will dictate some things like what size brushes do you use and the technique that you're going to use to pull off the results you're looking for. So if you ever watch the old school Bob Ross techniques that I watched as a kid, of course he's painting a 16 by 20 or even an 18 by 24 canvas pretty much the entire scene in a 30-minute episode. And now he is using a source painting that he's already painted in advance, so he knows where he's headed with his painting. But the point is, he's covering a full canvas in 30 minutes, so he's using large brushes, you know, a lot of 2-inch brushes, 1-inch brushes, and he's not really going for a lot of detail, although he is using a lot of contrast and color and lights and darks to pull off the details that he wants. So it's a pretty good technique for getting results in a short period of time without worrying about a lot of small brush, small detail work. So if you're going to paint trees and you want to do it quickly, you can use that kind of technique. So he used a lot of oil paints, and I typically deal with acrylics a lot, so I just wanted to show you a similar deal that I will use a large 2-inch brush and acrylics if I'm trying to paint a tree, paint something quickly, and I'm not worried about detail. So let's have a look at this first method that I'll use. So if you're trying to cover a lot of ground quickly, or you're just trying to paint fast, one of the things that's going to help you obviously is a really large brush. So this is a big 2-inch flat brush here. And again, you're not going to necessarily be going for a lot of detail on this. You're just trying to cover a lot of ground quickly or paint something in a short period of time. So if I'm trying to do a tree with that technique, basically real short order, first thing you're going to do is just basically put the background of the tree itself with the darker tones in there and just kind of establish where the tree is. So with a large brush like this, maybe you'll go, let's say we're trying to paint like an autumn fall foliage type of tree. So you'll go into maybe a fair amount of something like raw umber, some brown, maybe a little bit of black in there with it on a large brush. And just a hint of something like, oh, I don't know, yellow ochre. And you're going to establish where your tree is going to be. So you would really just come in here with a large brush and I like a tapping technique to create my tree texture. Now you can just, apply that in however you want. But the point is, you're covering a lot of territory in a very short period of time. And maybe to establish our tree trunk, you'll use something smaller, 3/4 inch brush, let's say, and really just more either black or raw umber to come in here and establish our tree trunk. Now, again, we're not looking for a lot of detail in here, so if I come in now with anything that I want to establish some limbs with, I mean, you can do that if you want. Come in here with something dark and try to establish a few branches and limbs in here. Not really all that necessary. It's just up to you. Again, how much time are you trying to spend? How much detail are you trying to put into this? And then again, I'm using acrylics in this instance, so I'm going to let this dry for a couple of minutes. Maybe I'll work on another part of the painting or whatever I want to do and before I come back and finish this off. So I'm going to give that a couple minutes to dry, and then I'll show you how I put the other layer on there. So now that this acrylic has had some time to dry, probably the first thing I would do is just highlight on that tree trunk a little bit, and all it really takes is just lightening up your values a little bit of maybe some browns or some blacks or whatever tree you're trying to make, and just coming in here and adding in whether you want to create some bark looking texture or depending on the tree you're trying to do. You can do a variety of things, obviously. You just have to decide ahead of time, okay, what kind of tree am I trying to make and what I want it to look like. But you just touch in some lighter values of some color in there to highlight your tree trunk out a little bit. And I am basically just tapping in to create some kind of bark looking texture on there. Who knows what kind of tree this is. I'm just showing you basically the technique to quickly come in here and throw something in. Now on our leaves, again, we're covering ground quickly, large brush. So I'm going to come back to this giant 2-inch brush here, and we're saying we want to do some kind of fall foliage thing. I'll just use basically the top half of this and the end of the brush to texture in my leaf texture. And so I'll tap it in some color. Maybe, I mean, let's just keep it simple here. Just go straight into some yellow ochre, let's say. And you'll hit on the tops out and above where your dark background colors are and tap that in. Again, this is the fast, essentially the Bob Ross technique that you saw, just doing it with acrylics as opposed to doing it in oils. But you want to start on the top edges of where your highlights are going to be and then come in and leave some dark areas to be some of the shade back in the tree itself. Work your way down the tree. And you've essentially created, in a very short period of time, a tree with leaf texture on it. With a large brush, not tons of detail in there. And you can turn these things out in a matter of minutes, okay? Now, that's again large brushes, not a lot of detail. You can cover large canvases with that very quickly. You can do a lot of background work with that very quickly, however you want to do it. So that's a single individual tree with that. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you here is, okay, if I wanted to add a little bit more detail to this process, really all I'm going to do is drop my brush size. It takes a little longer time, obviously, at that point, and I vary up the colors a little bit more, so it adds a little bit more detail to it, an extra layer, but still a fairly quick process. So here is a very quick large brush tree. Now let's take a look at doing it with slightly smaller brushes and adding just a little bit more detail to it. Alright, so let's look at this process now with a slightly smaller brush here. This is a 1-inch brush, and we're going to have a little bit more detail this time around and take a little bit more time to do it. The first thing I'm going to do here is just put a little bit of a ground so we'll know where we're starting here. This is just basically some brown and some black right here. Just creating a bit of a ground that we can get our bearings in terms of what we're working with here. Process is going to be very similar to before. We're going to lay in some trees back in here, some background trees with this 1-inch brush, and I'm going to use it to create the canopy here at the top, the darker areas here at the bottom, and the areas at the top will be a little bit lighter because that's where the most light comes in as we lay in these background colors. But I'm going to start here with the darker stuff towards the bottom. It's the more shaded area. So this here with a 1-inch brush is going to mostly be some brown and some black here. And I'm going to just turn this brush as I rotate through here. There's some green in this mix too, by the way. I'm going to rotate and turn my brush to create these different textures and angles and little things going on here that might be a little hard to see on camera, but when you look at this in person, you can pick up all these little details in here because of how you rotate and turn the brush. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. But if we're talking about a group of trees here or a tree line of some kind, underneath here in this lower area will always be darker because it's more shaded. So as we're laying in our background color here, it's going to be darker towards the bottom. And again, we will lighten it up a little bit as we get towards the top of the canopy. Would there be more light penetration from the top? But I'm basically just using this brush to tap this color in, rotating my brush now. We're going to move up and not darken things up as much here. So this is going to be mostly green with a little bit of raw umber in. And still rotating and turning the brush, tapping it in, creating different angles, different textures, different little things going on in here. Just makes it more interesting, creates different shades and lights. And I will come in maybe just add a little bit more of the raw umber here, just to create a little bit more contrasting stuff going on. We'll finish up this right side here with some more green, and this is like some sap green here maybe, I don't know, it's grass green, doesn't really matter. Whatever green you've got will work. You need to darken it up a little bit, just put in a touch of raw umber in there. Now we've got ourselves a good starting point here. And you can add in some indications if you want here of some tree trunks. So I'm going to take in mostly some black here, a little bit of raw umber. Still using this 1-inch brush, just basically creating a couple of indications of some tree trunks in here. Nothing real specific. Again, you can make this as detailed as you want right here and add as many of these as you want in. Now if you want to add more in than what I'm doing right here, you're going to probably have to change brushes. So for instance, this smaller angled brush here now, I can grab that and add in some more detail here if I want. And you can put in as little or as many of these little limbs and tree trunks as you want. It just depends again on how much detail you want to put in here, how much time you want to spend on this. If you're trying to turn this stuff out very quickly, then you probably don't do this part at all. If you're wanting to add a little bit more of something to it and you've got the time to do it, then yes, you can come in here and put as much of this as you want. We're going to say that you can even come in here and add a little bit of leaf texture here up above this tree line at the top here to break things up where some limbs may be extending up into the sky a little bit. But I can do the same thing here with the larger brush if I want. So for now, let's move back to this 1-inch brush here, and now we're just going to take this same technique, lighten up our values of our green a little bit here, and start adding in our highlight layers. And it's going to be more than one layer here. So this first pass is going to be more of a medium value kind of green. It's a little bit lighter than what I've got on my background color there now. It's not a lot lighter though. I'm just lightening up a little bit with maybe like some yellow ochre here. Maybe a touch of titanium white, not much. But now I'm going to come in here mostly with the corner and just kind of tap and touch in little leaf textures, or light value of this green here, highlights. And again, this is more of a medium value here. It's just a little bit lighter than the darker background color we've already laid down. And see, I can extend this again on this top of this tree line with the corner of this brush if I want to break up some of that skyline there. And you just kind of turn and rotate the corner of your brush a little bit to make different little shapes here as you tap this in. And once we get some decent coverage here with this medium value, we will lighten up our greens probably at least 1 or 2 more times to finish this off. With this medium value I've got here, I might come down here into the bottom where we're really shaded towards the ground here and add in just a little bit of maybe there's a bush or two down in here. And maybe as your brush is losing paint here, you can move up a little bit higher here just to create a little bit of indications of something going on back there in the distance. Who knows? Just something to break it up a little bit. But now we're going to lighten our green up a little bit more and put in maybe what's our final pass of highlight here. We'll see. So we're going to touch in with the corner here, some different little shapes of leaf textures going on, adding a little bit more highlight, just breaking up that dark background. But we definitely want to lighten things up the most all the way at the top of our canopy there. So I'll definitely put my brightest highlight towards the top. So I'm going to lighten this up just a little bit more one more time once I tap these little guys here in the middle. Extend a few up across the top here. But since that's where our light would be coming from, on top of our trees, we're going to make sure that the top of our canopy here has got our brightest value of highlight here. We're going to touch that in across the top of all of our trees here. And then we can work that down a little bit. Again, as our brush is starting to lose some of that paint now, we can move our way down into the tree line a little bit. Hit a few places here and there, just kind of randomly touching this in, tapping this in to create what looks like different limbs and leaves hanging on in there. So you can see we've still done this in a relatively short period of time here, probably 10 minutes or less. We have created a little group of trees here. We've done it with a 1-inch brush this time, so we've created more detail than what we had previously with our large 2-inch brush. But now with our 2-inch brush, we created a tree in like 2 minutes. So here we are now creating a clump of trees. I got a little bit more detail to them. Smaller brush that we've utilized pretty much for this whole bit here. And you know, maybe you can use this as a background in a painting. You can put some stuff in the foreground of it. Or you can do an entire landscape scene like this. I mean, however you want to utilize this technique. Again, it's done very quickly. So if you're trying to do some work that you don't want to take tons of time with, this is a good way of doing it with this size brush. If you got you know, projects that you want to spend even more time on, we'll look at that in a different video. For now, though, we're going to say this is done, our small clump of trees with our 1-inch brush. So if you enjoyed that one, give me a subscribe on the channel. And happy painting, everybody.